Good evening. I guess we'll start the planning board meeting for Thursday, April 30th, 2020. 7 o'clock. I need to read a statement first. I'm hoping that everybody can hear me. To open the meeting, the following statement needs to be read. Pursuant to the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open law L.C30A paragraph 20, as well as the select board's emergency order dated 3/16/2020, the planning board will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attend this meeting. Please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, a roll call of attendance will be taken. And first, as the chair, David Thorne. If I don't know what's the best way to do this, but I've forgotten how we did it last time.
But call the name and have them say aye.
Maybe we'll start with the board members. Do we need to have everybody? Just the board members. Okay, the board members. If you guys, I guess Warren.
Yes, I'm here. Warren
Okay.
Chamberlain.
Okay, Karen.
Present.
Okay, Josh.
Right here.
Jason.
I'm here.
I think we're all here. Okay. All right. So it's now that it's 7 o'clock or after 7, we are going to continue the public hearing for 1569 Washington Street. And I guess Joyce Hastings is here to give us an update, I guess, in regards to this.
Yes, Joyce Hastings with GLM Engineering, and I represent Michael Alves. We continued this application at the last meeting to see if we could address some of the issues. And what we would like to do tonight is separate. I have two applications before you, one for site plan approval and the other one a special permit for outdoor storage. And we would like to separate those two applications and deal with site plan application first. We will be continuing.
If I could just say one thing before you start, I'm sorry. I just forgot to mention too, if anybody is here for this hearing, if you would, what we'll do is you can present and then we'll have the members ask questions and a talk, and then we'll open it up to the, and we'll ask that you raise your hand. But if you could just wait for questions until we've had a chance. I'm sorry, I didn't mean I meant to mention that before, Joyce. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
So we've filed a site plan application to construct a building on the industrial portion of 1569 Washington Street. The building roof drains will tie into the existing drainage structure. The building is located within the existing pavement area, and it meets the required setback lines from within that industrial lot under the zoning setback requirements. And I'm not sure, we talked about this at the last meeting. We also talked about the other things, but were there any questions outstanding with respect to the building? We talked about lighting. With this building, the lighting would be downward shining. It would be over the doors. And we would also address the lighting on the other building that's parallel to this, the existing building in the parking lot, to be sure that all those lights were not shining towards the rear of the property and were also downward facing. And that's really the extent. The pavement's already there. We'll be cutting the pavement, placing the building within the parking lot, and again, tying the roof drains. Cutting the parking lot to tie the roof drains into the existing system, and then repaving to match the building.
Okay.
And that's,
so this is
that's the extent of what we're doing.
First part.
Yes.
Okay. This is the first part you'd like to go through.
Yes.
Is there any questions from board members they'd like to ask? In regards to this part of it, anybody have any questions? Okay. At this time, for the first part, I guess, I'm just trying to think. Since we're doing this in two parts, maybe I'll open it up to if anybody else has any questions, and then we'll go to the other part of the, I don't know if there's anybody at Butters or anybody in town here that has any questions that they'd like to ask in regards to the stuff that she's just presented. Yes, Robert?
Robert Whitenick, 40 Pavement Drive. I had submitted a letter late today, but it talked about some of the issues that had been affiliated with some of the work that had been ongoing at this property. Basically, to the north of the current limits of the project itself, and into the residential property, there have been a number of trees that were cut, and I pointed those out in some Google aerial photos of the letter that I'd sent to you. And it basically shows that a lot of these evergreen trees that were existing when you originally did the site plan approval back, I think, what year was it, 2010 or somewhere about there. Those trees have been cut in the residential part of the property now. And therefore, a lot of the neighbors along Hemlock Drive can not only see the outdoor storage that is there today, that is on the industrial parcel, but also, I can see right out to Washington Street itself. I see trucks and cars passing on Washington Street, even though, as a result of this cutting in the residential part of the land that should not have been done prior to obtaining a special permit. So what I put in my letter is a recommendation of a condition that the soils be reinstalled because it's all been graded, gravel and the like, and put in a soil berm, at least 12 inches depth of soil, and then plant evergreen trees along there. And I recommend a certain spacing, and I recommend the white pines because they do well in this condition along that, in that residentially zoned district, to restore the buffer that was removed between when you previously approved the site plan for this outdoor storage area and today. And so that is the restoration work. Similarly, on the eastern side of the property, if you look at the site plan, there's encroachments that are on the abutting property to the east. And similarly, he had gone in there and cut trees that also affected the buffer that we can now see out onto Washington Street. And so what I would like the condition be part of this approval for site plan approval for the building itself is that you make this condition that, again, they restore the soils, install white pines, and basically reestablish the residential part of the property back to, hopefully back to better conditions than it had been disturbed since. And then I think the third condition Joyce has covered, basically that condition of the approval is that all the lighting that is attached to the building be installed as downlighting. It's common throughout the town. A lot of people install these terrible floodlights that then point out to the street and that sort of thing. And in this case, the lighting that is on the building today is pointing towards the neighbors on Hemlock Drive. And so I'm asking that those three conditions be part of any site plan approval for what we're talking about right now, which is only the work within the industrial district. And so he's basically restoring the damage that had been done in the residential district and on the abutting property to the east. That's all for now.
If I could respond to that.
Okay, Joyce?
So there's nothing to say that you can't cut down trees on your own property. We absolutely can't have any storage out there on the residential property, But I want to back up a step and say that majority of the trees that they're referring to that have been cut were cut prior to Michael Alves buying the property, particularly to the east. To the east of this, on a budding industrial property that we do not own, there is some debris out there. There were some trees removed. That was not done by Michael. We walked the property the Friday after our last meeting. You can see that there is some kind of wood debris. I don't remember what it is, but it was not something that was placed there by the applicant. To the rear, he did cut down trees. He didn't cut down any trees in the 100-foot buffer zone. And again, it's trees on his own property. We have more than 500 feet between the industrial land and this residential property. And the tree, it is layered. I did not stand up on their property. We walked our rear industrial property line looking up towards Hemlock Drive, and there are layers of white pine saplings in amongst the hardwoods. You cannot see the houses between there. I don't know what it looks like at night. I don't know what it looks like where they're raised up and they can see down on Washington Street. But when you walk where the property line is here, you can't see Hemlock Drive. But again, this is his own property. We're not in the 100-foot buffer zone. Anything that we would do within the 100-foot buffer zone, we wouldn't be allowed to do without a conservation permit. And we would perhaps have to restore it if we were there, but we're not. We'll remove any tents or storage that are in the industrial area, but we're not inclined to do screening at this point, where we've got in excess of 500 feet of property between the proposed building and their residential property lines.
Robert?
In response to that comment from Joyce, the cutting that has been done is recent. You could see it on the aerial photographs, and it wasn't done by the prior owner of Pescatory. That was done back in 2000 when those trees were cut there, and that opened things up a bit. But that has since grown back in. When the planning board went through the permit for the, I have to look at the chronology. I think it was somewhere around 2010. The planning board went through a process to approve the building expansion, additional buildings that were on this property. And that was all in the intent that this tree buffer existed from the north, basically the residential part, because Mr. Alves did not own that land that was residentially zoned. And so all that land that was there was assumed to be the buffer. Whenever you propose an industrial use with outdoor storage, you should also propose buffering around the perimeter wherever it could be seen, especially by residential neighbors. And also it should be buffered from the street for that matter. Now, granted, this approval was granted before the planning board had conditions of special permits for outdoor storage for an industrial use, basically the truck use. In this case, you have had the trees that were cut in the residential piece, and I contend that he's done it, and a lot was done within the since 2016, was the first bit of cutting in the residential property, and there was further work in 2018, and then further again just recently, right before this last hearing. And so the assumption is that the work that was approved by the planning board back in 2010, thereabouts, would have had a buffer of vegetation, granted that it wasn't owned by the Alves at the time, but that buffer of vegetation would have been part of the thought process that the planning board would have granted an outdoor storage permit for that use. Now that he's already cut that vegetation, you've reduced that buffer significantly. And like I say, I could see his white buildings, I could see the original building, the existing building that's out there, the original building, and then also the new, what is that? It's like a fiber that they just put up. It's almost like a tent temporary garage that's a white roof that you can still see. Even as the vegetation's growing out, I could still see it. So one, he should not have cut the vegetation in the residential district, and he did it on the east side as well. And it wasn't by the prior owners. I can guarantee that. And I think, because of the planning board's jurisdiction in approving outdoor storage, they should also approve a buffer. And so if the buffer has to be on the industrial parcel, that's fine. But I think it should be all amenable to what he can do on the industrial piece itself, put the buffer on the residential piece. And I think it needs to be there. I think that's part of the buffering of outdoor industrial uses to everybody, not just residences, but it should be buffered to the street as well. That's good planning.
And I can't think of another project that has a 500-foot buffer between the industrial project and the residential property in the back.
Could I speak up for a sec? It seems to me as though Mr. Wideneck is mostly concerned about screening. And board members, the last few projects that we have done, this has been a concern over a lot of abutters. And I think that if we could talk about specificity in that nature, we might be able to get to a resolution here. Joyce, are you willing to, for the building only, we're not talking about outdoor storage, we were talking only about the building. If your client were to offer to come back with resolving the issues that we're talking about, providing screening for the neighborhood, making sure that it's all dark sky lighting. I mean, are we somewhere where we can have a conversation? Because I really think that we should be thinking about that.
I think it would be helpful if the planning board also came out and looked at the site.
All right, well then for us to do that, then I think that we would have to say that, we would continue till next time. And I would love to walk the site, quite frankly. I think that's a fabulous idea.
I believe we should walk it from the Hemlock Street side.
I'll walk it from any direction you want.
Yeah,
right,
just
wherever.
because.
Let's do that.
I see Elliot Wheelwright, if I'm pronouncing, has a question.
It's Elliot Wheelwright, 64 Hemlock Drive. Where I'm sitting right now talking to you, I look right out here and I see right through the woods and I see a big white structure. I don't know what it is. And I see a large earth type moving, one of those yellow caterpillar type pieces of equipment right through my trees here. So Joyce, you might not be able to see it from there, but I have a clear view from here. I'm sorry. Is my wife Debbie?
Debbie, yes.
Debbie Wheelwright, 64 Hemlock Drive. And I mentioned this in the last meeting also, but as soon as it gets dark out here, we will also be sitting in this same place looking right out at bright lights shining this way.
Okay. And I believe Dan Sweeney has a question.
I don't have a question so much as I'm a next door neighbor of Robert Wideneck, and I can attest to what it is he's claiming in that the view in the back of my home is significantly changed since the cutting has taken place. I'm not knowledgeable about who did it, what, when, but I will say that the business of the lighting, which has been addressed, I understand, and also the view looking out and seeing all the way out to traffic on Route 16 is in fact viewable. I just want to second Robert's concerns about the property images.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, so again, I'd say that it's the same conversation, right? It's about the screening. It's about providing a buffer. So I would ask my direct question again of Joyce. Would your client be open to solving these issues?
So I'm sure that we would be open to discussing them. I've never worked on a project where I've had not just 30 feet, you talk about a 30-foot buffer to a residential zone or a 50-foot buffer, and that we're planting a few trees and doing some screening. And in this case, I've got, so much screening between here and there. It just seems I'm going to plant a row of white pine when I've got a forest between me and them. I'm just trying to understand what they're looking for, I guess. I just don't know what.
It sounds like they're looking for what used to exist. They're looking for.
I am not.
Thank you.
So if I could chime in here, I would say that screening after listening to the abutters is absolutely appropriate, and at least taking a walk, as we've all suggested, is I would say step one. And I mean, we just heard from multiple abutters that look, I'm looking right out my window, I see their building, I see the equipment, I see the property. How could you not say that screening is appropriate?
I guess I think we need to see it.
So then how about if we motion to continue? Because if we're not we're at an impasse.
Yeah.
So how about if we motion to continue at our next meeting, and we would then probably have to set that up. So I motion to continue a next meeting, May 14th.
May 14th. Does that work for everybody else?
So let me ask a question. Like you say, so you're saying that if we discussed screening tonight and were agreeable to screening along the back property line, wherever that might be, and planting whatever, doing a berm and planting trees, that you would entertain closing the hearing tonight?
That would be up to the board.
Karen?
That would be
chime in really quickly. So site plan review is not a public hearing, right? So the site plan review can be administratively. It's the special permit that is the public hearing.
Okay.
I'm not sure what Karen is suggesting.
Okay. So the second part of it is that she's about to propose, or she was going to propose, is the part that we're really talking to about continuing this versus what we just discussed.
Right. If Joyce wants us to walk the property in order to have a clear understanding of where the demarcation line is for whatever used to exist or whatever someone might be willing to put there, or our discussion on what we might require to be put there, if we can't do that by sitting here tonight, then I don't see why we would keep going round and round about this.
All right. So if we agreed to put up, what Robert had suggested, a 2-foot high berm, wide enough to plant and stagger, evergreen, perhaps not all white pine, because those maybe between white pine and spruce along the top. And we say that they're
The top being
6 feet in height. Is that what we're talking about?
the top, meaning the top of the back in the residential section, or what do you mean top?
Right along that property line.
Would the plan be helpful to everybody?
Yes, please.
The site plan, okay. Here it comes.
Excuse me. LA, we all right, 64 Hemlock Drive, 6 foot might be a little short.
Okay.
There's a, I don't know what that plan is. The building is, there's a different plan, Karen.
You want the original site plan application,
The building,
right?
yeah, the building is moved over. Maybe, do you have the colored version?
I got it right, yeah, I got this one, I think.
Working on it.
That'll do. So the building is more parallel towards the middle. We have the colored presentation plan, but where it says, if you had one more plan,
A little bit, Chris.
Yeah, that's,
the other plan shows where the parking pavement ends, so that might be more helpful.
Is this your
The colored presentation, yeah.
We're having a problem locating it, Joyce.
Okay.
Hang on.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, that's it. So right along where the property line is,
so Joyce, would that be the solid gray versus the flecked gray?
yeah, if you go put the hand a little bit more north, the other way, go to, yeah,
the
so
wetlands?
where there's a lot line there, it says, I think it says right there, that line right there. So
Okay.
if the berm went along that area there,
And Joyce, is that the difference between residential and,
yes.
okay, thank you.
Yep. So if we brought it back to where the corner, bring it down to the bottom of the page, slowly, a little bit further. Okay, right about there. And now just walk it back up to the top of the page again. So keep going a little further, like right in that area there. If we did a 2 foot wide berm, not a 2 foot wide berm, a 2 foot high berm, and then planted evergreen trees staggered on top of that.
6 foot high pines
Yep.
on top of that. So,
Pine or spruce or something that will fill out and grow taller. Pine will grow faster, and it will grow bushier, but at some point it loses. We'd like to intersperse it with something that would be long lasting. Or if everybody wants pine, that's fine with us. It's just it will grow faster.
Right, but then
Just to be clear, so the effective height would be 8 feet.
Effectively, yes. But
right, berm plus initial.
yep.
Okay.
okay. Robert.
Robert Whiteneck, 40 Hemlock Drive. If you can go back to that plan and you have to scroll up to the east, in other words, up to the top of that page, there was existing vegetation that was cut around between those boulder piles. Do you see those two boulder piles? And so I think the vegetation buffer planting should be continued on there, because right now that sight line that I have goes right across that area and right out to Washington Street. Like I say, I could see trucks right in front of their entrance driveway in Washington Street, cars and vehicles in Washington Street. And so I think the planting should continue on that gray spotted area that goes all the way up to the to where that says shipping container in that upper right-hand corner. Yep. So that's the ending points of where you should continue the buffering.
So in the flat area there, in front of the boulders. So the berm is fine, but right where that hand is right now is probably where a septic system will go. It doesn't impact whether I put a berm there for screening below there, but right there is very likely where a septic system is going to sit. The grade will be raised up from what it is right now a little bit, which will help with us and on the berm side of it. But a berm along that portion of the property where the boulders are, we can, extend one there also.
Up to the corner there.
Yep.
Are there any other questions, concerns? Would anybody like to discuss this? So this is the first part of this that you're discussing, correct?
Ellie Wheelwright, 64 Hemlock Drive. Curious, where's the septic system coming from? What's it going to?
It will go to one of the buildings.
Okay. Dan Sweeney?
Yes, I think I'm just a layman when it comes to the drawings and scale and that sort of thing, but we're seeing a top side view of what is proposed. And we're discussing a side view that is not, I have not seen in any of the presentations that, at least the first meeting we had and this one. I think it's incumbent to also see a side view so we understand the concerns that we have about being able to view out to Washington Street. There's no way that we can tell from the top side view that the concerns we have are going to be addressed.
Okay. There's no, you don't have any drawings of a side view, I guess.
What do you mean?
We're talking about the obscuration of the view, and from our vantage point, at least, we don't know what's going to be covered if you put two, let's say, some 3-foot trees. That's not going to be addressing the issue that we still have, unless it grows for 20 years and we are able to not see outside.
No, we're not talking 3-foot trees. We were talking a 2-foot berm and 6-foot trees.
So a total of 8 feet to start.
And then they would grow.
Well, as I said, I'm a novice when it comes to that, but I know that from where we are, I don't know that that's going to accomplish what it is on an immediate basis, what the concerns are.
All right. Warren, did you have any concerns or questions?
Well, looking back at that plan, again, where the houses are, I'm still not quite oriented. I don't have that with me. I was not at the last meeting, so I didn't see all the plans, and I'm trying to orient to myself to what I'm actually looking at. And like, I think looking at the side view, or how does it look from looking at Hemlock Street and down? What are we looking at in terms of where this project is?
It sounds like Hemlock, the properties on Hemlock Drive are they're at a higher elevation than Washington Street. And in between Hemlock Drive and the back of our property is over 500 feet of deciduous trees, predominantly red maple mixed with red oak, also interspersed with white pine and white pine saplings in the understory.
But they can see through that to what you're doing.
They're attesting that they can see from the project. When I stand in the back, I can't see them, but I'm not standing in their property looking down. They're obviously saying they can see it.
Yeah.
Sounds more and more like we need to go up there and walk the property. I'm trying to think what else we could do.
Yeah, I'd like to do that.
Sounds like we were proposing to put a berm and then 6 feet of pines, but it sounds like there's still some questions in regards to this. Kirk Steinhardt, you're muted. Oh.
Hi, I just wanted to point out that we're in the transition between winter and summer now. And what we've been looking at for the past 6 months is going to change pretty quickly over the next week. So you may want to get out there. If your decision is dependent on what you see, get out here sooner rather than later.
Okay. Karen, did you have any more thoughts or concerns?
The only thing I would suggest is, Joyce, if you're able to send Karen Sherman a drawing showing your proposal regarding the berm and trees, just on that drawing that you just showed us. That way we can kind of all print it out from our home offices, bring it with us, and take a little walk out there and have a good sense of where this thing is.
Josh, did you have any questions?
Not at all.
Okay. Now, we don't want to even go into the second part, or?
Well, I think we should at least, I should at least be able to, I don't know, if you, I would like at least express what we're thinking of doing.
Okay, and the second part.
Or we can continue that till the next meeting after we have a site walk. That's fine. Just in the effort to help your meeting move along.
Okay.
Are you? And you are meeting. Your next meeting is when?
Well, we're trying to decide. Somebody had suggested May 14th. I don't know if that worked for everybody else. I think Karen had suggested that, but I didn't know if anybody else if that worked for anybody else.
Yeah, that's fine with me, Dave.
The sooner the better.
Okay. Okay. So May 14th, I guess. Would somebody like to make a motion to continue the public hearing for 1569 Washington Street to May 14th? And I guess the time would be, again, the 7 o'clock work. And if you could state your name when you're suggesting, if you're going to make a motion, I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to this.
Karen, did you make that motion?
No one has made a motion yet.
No, I guess I'm a little bit confused.
Oh, okay.
According to Karen Sherman, the building discussion is not a public hearing. Correct?
The thing that requires a public hearing is the special permit request, and
Correct.
That is for the outdoor storage.
So are we going to discuss that tonight, or are we going, I think what Joyce just offered. Joyce would like to present something, she said.
Right. She also realizes that we're 45 minutes in and, right.
I would really like to resolve the site plan issue. They would like to build the building. And so is it possible to schedule a site walk now?
Sure.
Sure, yeah.
Is anybody free tomorrow?
Sure, tomorrow? I can go anytime.
I'm free tomorrow.
I think it's supposed to rain, but
I'll bring umbrellas.
how many people can go?
We can all go.
Oh, okay.
Can we get permission from the Hemlock Drive people to walk in their properties?
Robert? Oh, you're on mute. You're muted.
Robert Wideneck, 40 Hemlock Drive. You do have permission to walk on my property, and you can even come up onto the deck, and that gets a perfect view of both the street and the buildings that are there
Okay,
behind
thank
40
you.
Hemlock Drive.
Okay.
Just let me
And
know when you're ready.
Elliot?
We are
okay,
at
thank you.
64 Hemlock Drive. You have permission to walk on my property, and there is a stairwell stairs up to the platform off of my porch. You're welcome to walk on that, but be careful. The railing is a bit weak, and I will not be responsible for that.
What is your address?
64 Hemlock.
Thank you.
64? Okay. Okay. All right.
Time are we meeting?
We'll meet on Hemlock Drive in front of number 40.
Number 40, okay.
And what time?
40. What time works, Warren? And I'm not sure who else is.
Well, anytime for me. Are we talking about tomorrow?
Is tomorrow? Yeah.
Or
Range
Saturday's
starts till
going to
1
be,
o'clock.
Saturday's going to be sunny. I don't know if Saturday works for anybody, but it's going to be sunny in the 60s.
Saturday is tough for me.
I can't do Saturday either.
Okay, well, tomorrow's fine.
But tomorrow I can only do after 1 o'clock.
That's
Unfortunately.
Okay.
2 o'clock. So tomorrow it's 2 o'clock.
Okay.
2 o'clock would work for me. And,
Okay.
and we're meeting exactly where?
And in front of
40
house.
Hemlock Drive? Oh, sorry.
In front of house number 40.
House
number 40.
Okay.
2 o'clock.
40 Hemlock at 2.
Yes.
And bring umbrellas.
Okay. Bring umbrellas and galoshes.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much. And so can we continue the other portion of this meeting until the
May 14th.
So would somebody like to make it? Karen, are you making a motion?
Make a motion to continue the public hearing for outdoor storage for, what is it, 1569 Washington Street till May 14th.
Oh, okay. And do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Warren is seconding that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much.
See you
Thank
tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to go back to some of the first things for a couple minutes before we.
Mark is on.
Oh, he's on. Oh, Mark's on. Okay. Oh, okay. Mark is on. Okay. Okay, great. So I guess now that Mark is here, we will open up the continue the public hearing for modification to definitive subdivision Constitution Village. And I believe we have a few people here from there to speak with us. And if I could if I could ask that everybody, I guess my assumption is that Dale would like to say a couple words, and then we will discuss it. And again, please, I know last time I take full responsibility, but we really can't have anybody pinpointing anybody, and we're all one board, and the responsibility lies with me. So I just wanted to say that, and so certainly we can't have anybody yelling or getting upset about anything. So if we please, but with that, I didn't know if you had anything that you'd like to. I don't know if Jim is presenting or Dale is presenting, or Angela. I'm not sure who's talking in regards to this.
I guess it depends on where we want to start. We are here to request an extension of the construction deadline to November 15th this fall.
Okay.
You just opened the hearing. That has nothing to do with the public hearing.
Yeah, we're just opening the public hearing for the for Constitution Village. So.
Yeah, I believe Dale's going to speak on that for Constitution Village. This is Jim Sullivan with Gary and Helnon, but I believe Dale is going to go over the request for the modification.
Okay. Is he going to speak now, or is he? He's muted. Okay. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Now we can.
Yes.
Okay. So we're starting with the proposed modification of the Constitution Village?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Can you give me approval for the plan then? Chris?
You have it. Just click on share.
I have it. All right. Can you see my screen then?
Not yet.
Yes.
What do you see?
I see you.
We see you, but we don't. So down at the bottom, it says share screen. So if you have something you want to show us, see that little green button?
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, if you press that,
all right,
you can share with us what's on your computer.
Of course, I thought I'd done that, but
it's all right.
It's tried it earlier and it worked fine, but it keeps moving down and this thing's in the way. Hold on a second. I got to move it up. All right.
Bang, I'm right back.
Chris has it if you'd like, Dale.
Yeah, that'll work fine.
Zoom in on this. Can you zoom in a little bit?
All right. Can you give me, that's fine. Do I have the use of the cursor?
No.
Okay. All right. Damn it. All right. Can you turn to the next page then, please? Or the page before this, I'm sorry. All right. So this is a proposed 5-lot subdivision. It's 484 feet long, and it's off of Old Cart Path, which connects to Concord Street. And then if you can go to page 3, please. All right. You can see what's currently approved is an A&R that includes lots. What we're proposing is lot 83, 84, 85, 86, and 87. And it is for 5 lots. It's currently called lot 83. And we're proposing to install this right-of-way. It would have town water, gas, and the individual lots will have septics on them. The other 9 lots on Old Cart Path are already lots, and we presented one plan to the Conservation Commission, lot 82, which is shown on this. We've presented that to them. And we will be presenting other plans for the lotting along Old Cart Path. In order to construct the Paul Revere subdivision, could you go 2 more plans, please? 1 more. And 1 more. Thank you. So this, where are we now? I'm sorry, I think no, this isn't the view I wanted. Keep going then. Are you existing conditions? All right, I'm sorry, keep going to sheet 10. All right, hold it right there, I'm sorry. So this shows the proposed profile of the road, we're having essentially a 3.3% off of Old Cart Path down to the low point. And then from there, 1% slope to the cul-de-sac at the end. The proposed stormwater design for this site has a basin that will handle only the stormwater proposed on this Paul Revere Lane. In conjunction with the requirements for building this site here, we had to enlarge we have to enlarge Basin B and C, and we're also diverting water to Basin E. So those are proposed, and a stormwater report was provided to Tetra Tech. They've come back with a nearly clean letter. They had one item they were concerned about. We addressed that, and I assume that you haven't heard back from him yet, Karen?
No.
Okay. So there's still one item left open on the review for the stormwater. So one of the items we got today was from Scott Moles. He was concerned because we haven't done the testing for the subdivision. We've actually have done testing for the front two lots that are on Old Cart Path, and we will make appointments to do the testing for the other three lots in the rear of this subdivision. Probably call him tomorrow to see about setting up the schedule for that. One of the items that we want to bring to your attention is that we're asking for we sent in my letter of January 30th. We requested a finding for section 5H2B, which has to do with the proposed modification in relation to the open space residential developments. So that's a requirement, and we'll essentially open it up for questions at this point.
Okay. Anybody that has any questions? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, it's Mark Bobrowski. May I chime in a bit?
Yes. Mark, how are you?
Good. Good evening, board members, and good evening, representatives of FAFSA. I did speak with Attorney Roloffs when Karen asked me to join in this evening. And on this particular issue, I want the board to understand what FAFSA is asking for. 5H is the applicability section, subsection 2 of 5H of the open space residential development. Basically, it says no subdivision creating two or more lots from any parcel or a set of contiguous parcels may be approved except pursuant to site plan review under this section and section 7 of the bylaws, where the planning board finds, upon a written request of the applicant, that an OSRD will not achieve the purposes of this section as effectively as a conventional subdivision, this section shall not apply. That's the finding that's being requested. Where the planning board finds, upon the written request of the applicant, that an OSRD will not achieve the purposes of this section as effectively as a conventional subdivision, this section shall not apply. So you're being asked to make a determination that this OSRD, in effect, is better than a conventional subdivision. I'm sorry, that the conventional subdivision is better than the OSRD option. Let me repeat that. Go ahead, Dale.
Just that we wanted to say that the original subdivision was a conventional subdivision, and we aren't taking any credit for any additional lots or anything that's allowed under the open space item. So it doesn't really work well to put an open space in this small area.
Yeah, I agree. That was covered when I spoke with Attorney Roloffs as well. So let me just repeat this so you understand. The board has to make a finding that a conventional subdivision here effectively achieves the purposes of this OSRD section better than or equal to an OSRD.
Okay.
And if you're not,
Can you put that in like layman terms?
Well, Karen has a copy of the bylaw there, I'm sure.
And Karen wanted to ask a question.
Go ahead.
I do. So what, in effect, not to make their case for them, but they have a conservation restriction proposed on the plan, which I believe they've been discussing with the Conservation Commission. So, I mean, I guess just the status report on that would be good.
The only point, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The only point I want to make is that you will require in your open space 50% of it to be uplands. And in this case, our CR for the conservation is 100% wetlands. So I'm not trying to hide anything from you, and I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Right, and Karen's asking about the status of conservation, Dale?
Yeah, we haven't decided on the heavy lines that were on that plan show the delineation of what we proposed as a possible outline for that, but it hasn't been determined. We don't see any issue if they want us to move it up to the 50-foot wetlands buffer or something of that nature. So it hasn't been determined, but it is going to be provided as part of the ongoing to meet because of the potential vernal pools. This was an agreement that we made with the Conservation Commission to provide this CR to protect areas of the along Dopping Brook.
As far as the conservation goes, you've had several meetings and the status of the conservation meetings and so forth?
Yes, we're really all they're waiting for is that Tetra Tech has agreed to the design for the engineering for the stormwater.
Okay.
Mark, Dave, Karen, Jason, Santos. Could you explain one more time what you said? And I know Karen Langdon was asking you, in layman's terms. I'd like to also add into that, what exactly, in your opinion, as an attorney, what is the advantage to the town of making that finding, as you pointed out?
Well, if your finding is essentially, they're asking you to make the following finding. Please find that a conventional subdivision achieves the purposes of the OSRD better than an OSRD. That's effectively what this sentence says. Where the planning board finds upon the written request of the applicant that an OSRD will not achieve the purposes of this section as effectively as a conventional subdivision, this section shall not apply. Now, Karen pointed out that they've got a proposed conservation restriction. There's a certain requirement for open space in an OSRD. I don't think they can meet that requirement for open space, given the size of the modification here. So they're asking you to make a finding that basically liberates them from the OSRD requirements with regard to this 5-lot modification, or 6, whatever it is, 6 lots.
All right. So basically, building the 5 or 6 lots without having such a stringent requirement for open space. Do I understand that right?
Sounds like it to me. Dale can confirm that.
That is correct. 5 lots.
So I'm curious.
Remember, the original subdivision was not an OSRD.
Meaning it had the proper open space requirements.
Meaning it was developed as a conventional subdivision.
So if it were a conventionally zoned subdivision, if I'm trying to understand this, does that mean there would not be as many permissible homes there?
No,
Karen, it is a conventional subdivision.
But you're saying the OSRD, isn't that open space residential design or something like that?
Yep.
So on both options, we're going to have the same amount of open space?
On
In
this
an
option, you have
OSRD
no open space.
Right. In an OSRD, not less than 50% of the land shall be devoted to common open space. The open space shall not include land set-asides for roads and parking. Not more of the 50% minimum common open space shall contain, not more than 50% of the open space shall contain wetlands.
And
So that's
well, here.
well, yeah, that's effectively what they're asking for a waiver from. When Attorney Roloffs and I spoke, he and I had a conversation about the section 5H2B and its ongoing legality. It was written long before a certain case that I'm very familiar with. And, Roloffs wasn't in any way a threatening conversation, but he said, what do you think of the current ongoing validity of that section? And we agreed that if it came down to having that discussion, then we should probably punt this issue to the next continued session of the hearing.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Any more questions?
I mean,
So if the board is inclined to make the finding, that would eliminate the need to postpone the discussion. But if the board is still wanting to hear some reasons why they should be persuaded to do so, or you want to hear a full-blown discussion on the legality question, Roloffs and I agreed that we should do that at a continued session.
I would rather continue it, but I'm one of, there's another 4 people.
Well, there are other issues that are outstanding, and that is that the Concom has a big say in this. If they're negotiating something which is in effect open space, it sort of affects the way that you think about this. So it's good to track what they're doing. It's also good to have input as to what they're doing. With regard to the stormwater, it's sort of a circular situation. They're waiting for your peer review, which we're sharing, I guess, to put it that way, to have a clean review. Dale and I discussed an issue today that I raised with the DPW folks about their use of structures, water quality structures, that require maintenance with a vacuum truck, which the town of Holliston does not own. And we do not currently have enough of those type of structures to have a regular contract for. So in effect, we're looking at a stormwater system that has an unknown cost to the town of Holliston. We don't have a capacity in-house to maintain it. And so we need to explore the impacts of that and perhaps pursue an alternative design approach for the stormwater. So regardless of what the peer review engineer says about it working, practically it may not work for the town of Holliston in terms of maintenance. So those 2 issues alone, I think, are a good reason to just continue out and work out the details of what could be amended and how other issues get permitted.
Okay.
You also have a letter today from the Board of Health agent who says that he would like to weigh in, but they have not filed everything that they need to review. But I think it would be good for the planning board to have input from the Board of Health, the Concom, and the DPW folks about the stormwater issues, as well as the Board of Health weighing in on the overall buildability.
Jason, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I would just throw also in there that we should probably hear more about the advantageous aspects of each. I'm not convinced either way, quite honestly, and I think we need to learn more and hear more about from either Mark or from Dale or whomever. So there seems to be a number of reasons to postpone and move on.
Okay. Would somebody at this point like to make a motion to continue this public hearing? And I guess the question is, when would we be ready to meet again and discuss this? Whether we're setting other dates?
Can Karen give us a summary of where we are on the clock in terms of our decision deadline?
We're out there on the clock. The issue is what levity we have with the emergency order, or with the governor's emergency order. Do you want to know a specific date, Mark?
When did they make their application?
The end of
the
December.
Modification. And is this, so this didn't come in with a preliminary plan, this came in with a definitive plan?
Yeah.
So that would be end of January, end of February, end of March. We should get an extension of time just to keep it clean.
Yeah.
So whatever date you pick, add another 2 weeks, and then we'll keep going that way. 2 weeks for the decision to be filed with the Office of the Town Clerk. So if you pick, for example, May 10th for the continuation date, get another extension of time to file the decision with the Town Clerk until May 24th. That gives you time to write it up.
Okay.
So then the dates we're talking about would be 14th and then to the 28th.
Okay. If you could ask Dale to give you something in writing, that would be great.
For Angela?
Yeah, can I do that tomorrow, or do you want me to email something to her now?
If you say that you're okay with it on the record, you can do it tomorrow, Dale.
I'm reluctantly okay.
Thank you.
So do we want to set another meeting up for the 28th of May?
No, the 14th, I think.
Oh, we want to do the 14th, okay.
14th.
All right.
I think yeah.
2 weeks is to allow the decision.
Okay.
Right.
I do have one question.
That's Jim.
Yes, Jim Sullivan.
Yep. So I know Karen mentioned something about the stormwater water quality structures came up today. So will we receive town comments then, department comments, Karen, memos or such from the folks as you seek more input and so forth? Obviously, we got something from Board of Health recently. We've been working with Conservation for several meetings. So I'm just curious on, 2 weeks from now or a week from now, will Dale have comments from the various departments or that sort of thing? Not in a week, but what I'm asking is, how does it going to come?
The way it usually comes from DPW is that I have to pull a few teeth and that they are reluctant to write words. So what ends up happening is we have a discussion and I sort of translate it for them. So I raised it as an issue on my own without them having reviewed the stormwater. I reviewed the Tetra Tech letter either yesterday or the day before and sent Steve from Tetra Tech some questions about the structures. And then I raised that with Dale when I spoke with him earlier. I did place a call to DPW and talked briefly with Tom Smith, the highway superintendent, who, simply said we don't have a regular contract on a vacuum truck, and to try to find out more about the maintenance frequency and the potential costs of it so that the board could weigh that and he could either factor that in. And then, of course, he would prefer to see some sort of alternative design.
Okay. I was just curious the process.
His initial comment to me verbally.
Good. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So we're looking at continuing the public hearing until May 14th. And that we already have something scheduled for 7 o'clock. So we want to say 7:15 or 7:30?
7:15 or 7:30, sure.
Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion to that effect?
motion to move this to the 14th of May.
Okay. Josh has made a motion. Would somebody like to second that?
Second, Jason Santos.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. Okay. But I guess.
Mr. Chairman, if you could just have a second motion to extend the time to file the decision in the office of the town clerk until May 28th. Now that the applicant has agreed with that, that would be a good idea as well.
Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion to that effect?
Yeah, make a motion, pursuant to what Mark said about the filing with the town clerk by, what was it, May?
28.
28th.
All right. Do I have, Josh has just made the motion. Would somebody like to second that?
I'll second
Jason Santos. Okay.
Okay. I don't know.
It's a tie.
I guess Jason seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Warren? Jason?
Aye. Yeah.
Aye.
Okay. Josh and Karen? You are?
Aye.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Now I guess we have a few other things in regards to go over here with, I guess one of the things is Constitution Village construction deadline and E-form construction cost estimate. I don't know if everybody has that paperwork in front of them. I have it here somewhere.
Which one do you want to do first?
Should we do the construction deadline first? I don't know. I guess the construction deadline. Get the E-form right here. Okay. Okay.
Got it?
Punch list items. Get the E-form right here. Okay. Is there somebody that would like to talk with, from, I don't know if Dale's talking about this or is Angela?
Yes. Are you talking about the punch list items remaining on Constitution Village and then the extension to December of this year for those items that we're proposing?
Yeah, November 15th.
Okay. These two sheets here, okay.
If you can, I've figured this out. I've got the share thing on. If I can have, can you see my screen?
I see you.
Take over, okay.
Everybody has that paperwork, right? It's a 2-page document, I think.
I have it, yes. I believe everybody has it. I have it.
I think
I don't know if everybody else. I have it right here. It's,
yeah, that's the one.
Okay, all right.
Do you want me to read through it?
Roll up a little bit, Chris. There you go.
No, I think we can all read.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. All right. Are there any questions?
Is Ali there tonight?
No, he's not.
I'm looking at Ali's memo to Karen dated the 2nd, and I guess I'll just ask Dale. Your punch list is dated the 9th, and has Ali reviewed it after you prepared it?
Which punch list is that? Is that the one that we're looking at right here?
Yeah, I've got in the materials for the meeting. I've also got AP Associates April 2nd letter to Karen, and he's reviewed the tasks. And then you put out a punch list 1 week later on the 9th. Has Ali seen this? Because the last correspondence I have from Ali is the 2nd.
We've had discussions with Karen and Ali, and I would suggest that Karen could speak for Ali.
Yeah, Ali has reviewed this. You know, it's an issue of continued frustration that the project just keeps lingering. But it's an issue of them also trying to responsibly figure out tasks for 2020. I think Ali reluctantly agrees that Dale has identified in these 11 tasks things that are doable, and an approach that sort of keeps up the pace of what happened last year with the significant progress made on the subdivision. I think the two issues that have been takeaways for us going through the Form E process and adjusting the construction cost estimates are that this issue of taking the subdivision out for a year or more again can be, I don't know, made a little bit more palatable by this issue of agreeing to remove the binder on all of the streets, which has been factored into the bond estimate. So when we get to the bond estimate, there's a significant add-on to Dale's original request, and it includes removing the binder from all the streets. So what has happened with the repair of the drainage system and just the wear and tear over time, even on the new binder on Minuteman and Governor and Hiawatha, is that there's significant cracking and settling going on. And we think that it's, not going to make it over time. If we all agree that that can be redone, then at least these folks will get a new road in the end. That's one big issue. And then the issue of there being very few lots left on Minuteman, Governor, and Hiawatha, and hopefully the focus will be on developing those so that at least there's a loop-through system from Governor over to the top part of Old Cart, so potentially these people could get bus service, probably not in 2020, but maybe in 2021 as a result. So the hope is to try to sort of get the board members or get, I don't know, emotionally reconciled to this, where we understand that there would be too much damage to Old Cart with the construction down there to force completion in 2020. But to try to do these tasks responsibly, realistically in 2020. And believe me, I'm not really drinking the Kool-Aid here. I'm just trying to actually get something accomplished in this project. I guess that's my reconciled conversation with you. How's that?
It's fine. I would just point out that Ali has suggested completion by November 30th, and Dale has requested November 15th. I don't have a dog in the race. Pick one. It's been so warm in November.
The rules and regs say the 15th, and then if temperatures allow after that, but they're not proposing any paving anyway under that phase, so it doesn't really matter what the date is.
Okay.
And in fact, it could be December 31st. It doesn't really matter.
Well, I think the last time we were asked to make this motion, we made it clear in the motion that this is a list of projects that we expect to be completed, a list of tasks, and that if the tasks are not completed, then the board reserves the right to act on the performance guarantee. And I would ask anybody making the motion, if you're going to do so, to include that clause.
Mark, I think one of the problems with that now is that the tasks here for 2020 aren't all necessarily within the same bond. So there are currently two bonds for this project, and one is for the north side of Old Cart, north side of Old Cart, is that east of Minuteman. So it's hard to say that you would act on a bond. You'd have to sort of act on both bonds. So maybe it's an issue of rearranging the bonds based on this particular punch list. I'm not sure. So the way that the bonds have been done, so there are two bonds. One of them has a whole bunch of issues in it, and the other simply has Old Cart Station 7 plus 65 to Station 30.
Well, for tonight's purposes, I would be satisfied if the motion said that the board reserves the right to exercise its rights under the appropriate performance guarantee and leave it at that.
No doubt.
Okay.
I'm confident they're going to do the work. They did last year.
Okay.
Well, I also included in your packets, board members, some of the Form E and Phase 3 and what I called Phase 4 items. So just some notes from the discussion that Ali and Dale and Jim and I had when we chatted for quite some time. And I think the first bullet that I raised about the base course needing to be removed everywhere got adjusted in the bond, but I also think that that should be part of Safford's agreement. I mean, they've offered it in the bond, but I just want to make sure that Angela understands and can translate that to the other folks at Safford, that that's what we're expecting, that be added to the punch list for the future under what is now under the remaining items. So it's not just an assessment of the base course, but it's an agreement to remove the base course and replace it entirely.
Add that to a future punch list.
Yes.
Not this punch list, right? Okay, no, just clear so I convey the message correctly.
Well, I wouldn't call this a punch list for 2020, but call it action items for 2020. I'm not sure. A punch list would infer that you're completing items, but these are some new items.
So as far as, if it's Jim Sullivan, as far as the base code goes, several years ago, there was a negotiation, 81W negotiation. I think it was relative to gravel, and there was some discussion about somebody evaluating base course at least 30 days prior to potential final course. Is that correct?
We did that with
now, yeah.
Weston and Sampson was our consultant there.
Right, so is it unrealistic to say that you would reevaluate, at least 30 days prior to putting putting final on, and your third party would dictate what base course would need to come up? I'm not saying there'll be any that could stay or any that couldn't stay, but I'm just wondering how that language was drawn up back then, if you would. I don't have it with me.
Well, so then there was an endpoint in the project, and now there's not.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry. What I said, there at that point, there was an endpoint in the project, and now there is not. You're asking for an open end after November 30th or November 15th of this year. You don't have a completion date.
Right.
You're asking the board to push those 12 items to who knows when in the future. So you have a work program for 2020, but you have no idea how long those 12 items that are remaining are going to take. It could be 2 years, it could be 3 years.
And that would be, that would be what would happen a year from now. They would come back in
and then that base course is 10 years old.
Right.
Okay.
I liked Karen's compromise.
Your compromise?
My compromise.
Yes, where you weren't drinking the Kool-Aid, but you were getting something done.
Well, I mean, I think we all have a little bit of gray hair about this issue. You know, I hope that we don't lose Ali in this process. You know, that it's very frustrating for him. He doesn't understand the legal parts of it, and, you know, would like to force completion, but understands that, you know, with so many lots remaining, the damage to a completed road would probably be, you know, unwieldy for the town. The issue is trying to get more services to the residents to get them out of a construction zone. So, I mean, I don't know that you can force Safford to market lots 60 through 68 before they market lots on the north side of Old Cart Path, but that sure is what's coming out of Ali's mouth, right?
Yeah, and as far as the list goes, you know, I did speak to the client, and you and I had talked Friday with Ali, and, you know, and he was in agreement to get the lots padded and get the driveway entrances and get that stuff done on the sooner than later side, you know, this spring, to get the seeding done and get those lots up there padded and seeded so it's in a better position. Which I would hope would make it more marketable as well. But he's amenable in agreeing to do that, you know, as part of the early on process. Get that upper area there, you know, cleaned up. I say all of that with just the point that a lot of the material that he has to move would eventually go to an approved Paul Revere or somewhere else if Paul Revere didn't get approved. But the somewhere else is unknown right now. So there's a lot of moving parts as usual on this, and I'm not trying to say that it's not going to get done. Certainly the stuff on Minuteman, Governor Pritz, and Hiawatha, he's in agreement we'll get going on. You know, we talked about the shade trees and trying to get some of those set where they can be. And so he's in agreement to do some of the stuff that makes sense, as you had asked, on those lots. Marketing and selling those lots, I just can't speak to that as it's been stated before. So. And I agree with your comment on gray hair, just to be clear.
All right. Are there any other thoughts? Anybody? The question is, and with Mark, I just wanted to sort of what we think the next step is, and I know you suggested some of that, but where we go from here, and I know Karen has made some suggestions, so I don't know what we think the next step is right now.
Well, clearly what they'd like is a motion to extend the construction deadline to November 15th or November 30th, with the promise that they will complete the tasks on what Dale called the punch list for 2020. And the board reserves its right to execute on the performance guarantee, whichever is applicable, in the event that they fail in their efforts.
Okay. And everybody feels comfortable with that? Okay.
Sounds good.
And with that, would somebody like to make a motion to that effect?
Before you do, can I just add in that, you know, when you're looking at those remaining items within the subdivision, understand the gravity of them. I mean, it's massive reconstruction of the roads, as well as the detention basin system. I mean, it's possible that some of these items could move up depending on their phases of construction. I would like to formalize that agreement to remove the binder. And I don't know how you do that. It seems to me that the prior agreement has been set aside based on the extensions and the now splitting of the phase 3 items out into yet another phase.
Well, perhaps that could be a rider, Karen, that we would expect to have an agreement on the removal of the binder on or before the end of this construction deadline, November 15th or November 30th. So it'd be subject to that additional condition.
One other suggestion that Ali made to me earlier today was that there really should be like a fall inspection of the pavement so that if there's any repairs that are needed to overwinter, if we ever have a harsh winter again, that we're prepared for that. Apparently there are some issues on the north side of, or I should say the bottom half of Old Cart Path that were kind of significant in terms of sort of potholes getting out of control. And I don't know if that's sort of the edge of pavement creep there where heavy equipment went over the Cape Cod berm, but I think we probably should agree with the Gurrier and Howland folks to assess the situation prior to whatever November deadline you set.
Yeah, I would think, I think would be, that would be fine with that, like very early in September, look it over, identify what's needed, have enough time to get done before the plants close. Would be amenable to doing agreeing, having that in there as a, an inspection with Ali and Dale to review the, as you say, the base course or whatever's on the road for the winter. That'd be fine. Yeah.
I think it's kind of the same situation with the two cross-country drainage easements. It would be nice to have them more stable than they were this winter. At least the one that goes to Basin E was very unstable this winter.
Again, that's fine. We could do an early inspection on that. The growing season is now, and we could get a look at that shortly and see where we're at, and then look at again, in the fall and see what the improvement is. So be fine with that.
Okay. We gotta.
I'm good.
In the
you want me to take,
nope, go ahead. Never mind, I'm good.
You want me to take a crack at a draft motion?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
That's it. Okay. So the motion that I would suggest would be that the board approve the extension of the construction deadline until November 30th, subject to the terms of Dale's punch list and the following two additional provisions. One, that an inspection will take place on or before September 10th to identify necessary repairs to be made before the winter season and the completion of those repairs. And two, that the parties will work to have an agreement in place prior to the construction deadline on what binder will be ripped up and replaced going forward for the next extension of time that we will have for 2021. And as I've said all along, that in the event that that these tasks are not completed, the board reserves its right to exercise on the appropriate performance guarantee.
Okay.
I'll make that motion as stipulated.
Okay, Warren has made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Karen Langen has seconded that. All right, do all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I heard Jason, I heard Karen. Warren, you said aye?
Aye.
Okay. And then Josh? Okay, so we're all aye. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Now I guess on to the next, which would be the I guess the Form E construction cost estimate. Does everybody have that? Form? Oh, screen.
Mm-hmm.
It's way ahead of me.
Do you want me to? Okay. I can walk everyone through, I'm sorry. So Ali has reviewed this with Dale and I several times. And Dale, please chime in, but I'm just gonna sort of give the board members an idea of where this started.
All right.
So the current total of the two bonds is $4,200,000 and change. The submittal that was made in February started at $1,600,000. It was adjusted several times, and the most recent discussion that we had a week ago, when we agreed to do big add-ins for the base course, which I mentioned, took the totals up to $2,200,000. And then the discussion that we had yesterday about some items that were sort of in flux brought the total now to the $2,259,000 that you see on the screen. So again, the way that the bonds have been organized, and they have different timing on them. So the bond that was established in 2019 for Hiawatha Minuteman Governor, the top of Old Cart, that is the first 0 to Station 7 plus 65, plus the miscellaneous drainage runs, stands at $2,755,863 currently. I didn't separate those out in Dale's current estimate. The other bond has a July rider on it for Old Cart for the long run of Old Cart from Station 7 plus 65 through 30 plus 0. That currently stands at $1,397,526. So what you're seeing on the screen is the excuse me, was $895,717 and was up to $937,323 based on the discussion between yesterday and today. So the big items, essentially, there are a couple of sort of policy items that are in the bond. So the original plan shows streetlights. And I know that we're not really in the business of having projects that are big enough for traditional streetlights these days. It's actually on, if you just like cruise to page 2 of this particular form. So streetlights were in the bond, they came out of the bond, they went back into the bond. My suggestion is that the board formally send them to the Board of Selectmen to see whether the Board of Selectmen are interested in having them install streetlights. This is an issue in Spafford's other subdivision where the conduit and the bases for the structures have been put in place, and yet there are no streetlights because over time the utilities policy has changed about contracting with communities for installation of streetlights. If the selectmen are reluctant to contract for streetlights, especially in this location, being on the hill and being viewable from several other towns, it may make sense to waive the streetlight issue. So I think we should, the smart thing for you to do would be to send them to the selectmen and settle the issue once and for all. It's policy-wise, it's not good for the planning board to obligate the selectmen to this future electric bill, if you would.
So do we need to make a motion on it?
I would suggest that you make a motion on that if you agree to the Form E amount. and to add that situation in so that they could adjust that either in the future and hold this or approve this like this.
I'm sorry, this is Dale McKinnon. Can I enter in for a second?
Dale?
Yes. Angela might want to speak to this.
Yeah.
Whether we go with one bond or two bonds or continuing on.
Okay.
Is Angela there?
Yeah, on the bonds, Dale?
Yeah, right.
What are you trying to say?
Well, Karen was just talking about it, so.
Well, I was going to talk on the street lights and ask why the planning board can't waive the requirement for street lights, why we need to get sent to the selectmen for that.
Because the rules and regulations say that during an application review, the applicant should go to the Board of Selectmen and negotiate that up front. And then the planning board makes that a part of their decision. I think given the economic times and the age of this subdivision, I think the climate has changed, and I'm not sure that the Board of Selectmen wants to add any streetlights to our network.
Someone's mic is picking up a lot of stuff and I can't hear it.
I think somebody's doing their dishes or something.
Could someone mute their mic? They're doing the dishes or they have TV on in the back, but I can't hear what's being said. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
So even though the streetlights are part of the planning board decision, we have to go to the selectmen for a waiver?
Yes. Well, would you like to install them? Because there's no indication of that. There's no conduit in the street.
What about a modification request to remove the streetlights and keep it within the planning board? Would that be easier or doable? I'm just looking for an alternative here.
Well, you have a policy board that could decide in the selectmen, or if the planning board had a modification public hearing, you would be notifying all the residents and you have the potential for many, many people to weigh in. I guess it depends on how public of a process you'd like to make it.
Okay.
So what you're suggesting then, is that you would ask this board to send us to the selectmen and would be requesting what from them, a waiver or
a recommendation to the planning board. They could treat it as I mean, I don't know, Mark can weigh in on this, but they could certainly treat it as a field change, although it's pretty significant, but.
Yeah, we agree that there's no provision for lighting, and we want to have a process to not have to do that, and then subsequently, won't be there. It eventually get eliminated through the right channels. Correct. So whatever you guys, I guess, think is best. I guess let us know if Mark wants to weigh in. But
does the current approved definitive plan show lights, Karen?
Yes.
And explain to me again the out that the selectmen represent?
Well, I'm just representing that the town may have changed its mind about having streetlights in general. It's a giant undertaking.
Understood. Is there anything in the planning board subdivision rules and regulations that say streetlights are required unless the Board of Selectmen recommends you don't put them in?
Yes. I don't know that it says exactly that, but you get the gist of it.
Yeah. Well, a modification would be under 81W. It would require a public hearing and 2 weeks notice, and everybody who's in a butter gets a green card. If you go to the selectmen hat in hand and ask them to make a recommendation to the planning board that you don't need to put in the lights, it sounds like that would suffice and it would be a lot less trouble.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
I just think it's one issue that the residents probably would weigh in on, because I know it's being marketed as having streetlights. And I know, at least based on the 180 lots in the other subdivision, people are pretty passionate about having streetlights.
All right, so we understand that if you guys make that, what do you call it, a motion or a recommendation, Angela, we'll go that route, I guess, right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Well, I guess the issue is, do you want to try to have the board approve these surety adjustments, or do you want to put it on hold until you come back from the selectmen? I'm not sure how much the streetlights are in the bond for, but they're in there.
No, we would like to ask the board to approve the bond amount as it is right now, and then if there is a time where we come back for another reduction for the removal of the street lights, then we can do so at a later time. But we'd like the bond reduced to the 2.25. Please.
The other issue that we talked about that is sort of a policy issue is that street trees are an issue for the town in terms of maintenance. The preference is for the trees to be installed on private lots and not within the right-of-way. We have very limited resources with regard to maintenance. And many of the subdivisions, especially this one, have significant grading issues at the edges of the right-of-way where trees can be damaged, or trees can be where there's a lot of runoff or overland drainage. Not a good environment for the trees within that little strip. So there are a lot of trees in these bonds, and it would be nice to sort of formalize where they're going to go, especially on the lots that are developed and have residents living there, and some of whom have paid thousands and thousands of dollars to their own landscapers to enhance their lots. So it would be nice to get behind this issue really quickly.
Okay. So would somebody like to make a motion to this? To the bond? Somebody like to? I'm sorry?
I don't know how to word it. So.
Oh, okay. I guess in regards to the bond, what we're talking about here, right? On this. So you're making a motion to that effect?
Yeah.
To,
With what they want to do.
I'm sorry?
What they want to do.
I'm sorry, I can't hear what you're saying.
Is everyone all right with what they want to do?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll make a motion to reduce the bond, contingent on everything that was stated.
Okay. All right. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Warren has seconding it. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. All right. Okay. And then do we want, so are we at this point sending a recommendation, which would be to the selectmen, or do you want to wait on that?
I think she said she wanted to wait, right?
So you want to wait? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure. Okay.
And I'm sorry.
Go
ahead, Karen.
I would like to suggest that we get a street tree plan as soon as possible.
Yep, I heard that. I'll talk to the client, and I know what was on the definitive, and but the recommendation to go to selectmen for lighting, I would appreciate that to make an effort to try to get to them at some point in the near future. I think somebody just mentioned that.
All right, then I'll make a motion to recommend that they go to the selectmen for whatever they're doing.
Do I have a second?
Second.
So, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Josh, Warren, okay, Karen? You're on.
Yep.
Okay, and Jason, okay. Okay. So we have recommended that we will send this to the selectmen. Okay. All right. I'm trying to think what else we have. I think that's it for the subdivision.
Sweet.
Yep, thanks for your time and cooperation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Board members, I'll be talking with Karen between now and the 14th, and I'll talk with you again on that night.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
I guess now we'll jump to probably Marshall Street Solar, LLC. Land disturbance permit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, and members of the board and Karen. This is Steve Weah on behalf of Marshall Street Solar. I do have Joe Harrison, who represents the project, and Bob Fasanella, who represents the property owner here. I'll try and make a very brief summary of where we are from where we started. And so recall these applications for a 4.99 megawatt AC solar field were filed last December, and we jointly filed with the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, and the Zoning Board of Appeals for a permit and a use variance and a conservation permit to construct this solar array. We held our first hearings with all three boards in January. These were continued. We had a site walk with a joint boards in February 1st, I think was the date. And we have gone through a peer review with CMG with a number of different letters that have gone back and forth. This has included a lot of dialogue with the abutters. And there have been some fairly substantive changes to the plans that the developer has made to try and make this project palatable to the abutters and the residents that are closest to this project. And briefly and namely, it involves reconfiguration of the stormwater system. There were 4 basins that have been expanded to 5 to try and alleviate some of the discharges that might occur to the south near the Santos's properties. There's been landscaping that's been added from the Strock properties through the Canavans, Domacetis, Santos, and then most recently to the Webb property to the north, in that the developer has been engaged in some conversations about what the plans are, and there's been some landscaping that's been installed there, and then also a berm along Marshall Street, which is a scenic roadway. There have been some changes to the alignment of a roadway to preserve a large boulder to minimize or eliminate blasting that might have had to occur to remove that rock. We have recently gone back before the Conservation Commission, just recently in the last week or so, and gone through the peer review comments, which originally were issued by letter on March 3rd. There were 41 comments, and a lot of them were very technical in nature that revolved around the drainage. And so a lot of those technical issues have been resolved. In fact, all of them have. We've submitted documentation that Bob Fasanella's office has provided that was available on a public website regarding some of the endangered species and whether or not the pond was a vernal pool and where vernal pools might exist on the site. And so we formally and officially amended the application with that supplemental information so that everyone could have it. And I'm hoping that you've all seen that by now. There has been a peer review response letter that we prepared and submitted back to CMG on April 15th, to which that narrowed the 41 comments down to 8. And those 8 comments were later addressed in a letter in a revised plan and stormwater report on April 16th. And then the last correspondence that I had from David was that he was good with the last submittal and an email to Karen on the 21st of April. And then since the 21st of April, Again, I say that Joe Harrison has been in dialogue with the Webbs, who abut the property to the north, and they looked at it, and with the landscaping, they had asked for what amounted to about 40 solar panels to be removed closest to, I think it was their swimming pool, Joe, you could correct me if I'm wrong, in their backyard, that if they had a little bit more of that back. And so the very last plan revision that we filed with Karen by email would have been dated the 29th. And it simply reflects that last removal of panels, which dimensionally kept the project the same. It just removed, I think it was a total of 40 solar panels from the project, 16 kilowatt worth of power. And that, I think, is where we are. I think that the Conservation Commission is closed their hearing, and I believe that they're in the process of drafting their order of conditions for what amounts to, I think there are 2 riprap swales that will discharge water from the stormwater basins into the larger 13-acre wetland that exists on the western side of the site. And so for that work that will occur in there, I think, Karen, we still have one open issue with the ZBA, and that's technically the use variance to permit the large-scale solar in the residential agricultural zoning district A. And then this matter that, of course, is before your board, with the hope that we can have some discussion and close the hearing and hopefully move to approve the site plan. And I hope I wasn't on mute the whole time.
You're quite articulate, Steve.
All right.
Excellent.
Great. I don't know if there's any questions from anybody. Okay.
I remember the first time that you came in, you did a really nice presentation, but some of it escapes me at this point. Back at the slide that you just showed, how much land disturbance is going to take place in order to be able to level the land to assemble all of these solar panels?
Yeah, Karen, again, it's Steve Weah. I believe that the number is 22 acres is the area that will be disturbed and cleared.
So what's your process for how you're going to do that?
So it's typically done in phases. I think that we had mentioned that, to be honest with you, like the developer would not have selected, and I don't believe that they have yet, a contractor yet. And Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they typically don't start discussions on that until they know that they have a permit that's been approved. But these things are typically done in phases. I think that there's probably an appreciable amount of timber and lumber. And so there's dialogue with contractors of how that gets extracted. The land would be graded to the extent that it's necessary to meet really just the grades that are required for solar panel installation. And those range depending on the racking manufacturers from 15 to 20 or 25% grades that they are able to install ground mounted systems on. And so when they clear the site, they'll begin to, the first thing that they'll do is stabilize a construction entrance. They'll use the roads that exist throughout that site that we walked on during the site walk. And they'll use probably a lot of the vegetation from the branches that will probably be mulched on site, and that forms a pretty nice stabilization, for erosion and sediment control. And then they start constructing the sediment forebays and basins that will be permanent features, will also serve as temporary features. And so those are the things that sort of get built first. And as long as they can get access to the site to figure out which areas are going to require ground screws and which areas are going to require ballast blocks. And that determination is sort of made on the fly, with the exception of some of the area where they know that there might be some surface debris or rocks down just within that 100-foot buffer to the western wetland. And again, it's if the ground condition won't accept a ground screw, which is simply screwing in a helical anchor to support the panels, then they'll figure out which ones need those ballast blocks. And those are typically precast concrete blocks that would be brought in and simply placed where they would hold down the solar panels. And then they would typically probably, I don't know how this contractor might work, but they won't paint themselves into a corner. They'll start at the back of the site and work themselves, up to the front of the site. They've got equipment pads to install and underground cabling that brings all of the DC wiring back to these equipment pads and inverter and battery storage containers that you see in the center part of the site. And I think depending on the season, they'll work hand in hand with the landscape architect. I think that there have been a series of at least 4 different revisions to the landscape plans showing what they're going to plant and where. And the quantities and the species, I think, have all been spelled out. And so I think they'll want to get that stuff in, in a growing season. But I would defer to Joe to figure out and tell me when they anticipate construction starting. I know that it's probably a 5 or 6 month project, judging from the size of this that I think that we talked about at one of the prior hearings.
Do you want to talk about that, Joe, or is
Sure.
it something?
Yeah. The construction schedule, like Steve said, is 5 to 6 months long for a project of this size. It would be fall at the earliest that we would break ground. This site, where it is a brownfield, and we're working with DEP, and they've been very supportive of this use and our specific plan. We've been going back and forth with them a lot, but I think fall is the earliest that we'd be able to break ground, but we do have technically 18 months to build, 12 to 18 months. I think it's typically 12 months once you receive your statement of qualifications. But with COVID-19, there have been some delays on lead times for equipment. It's still a little unclear how construction will be affected and all of that. So everyone is receiving a 6-month extension. So it could be that we take our time gearing up for construction and onboarding all of the contractors that we'll need, and do that over the summer and fall and start construction in the winter. But it's sort of fall or winter that we're planning to start.
Okay. Karen, did you have any more questions?
I'm just kind of thinking of the overall or overreaching situation in town when all of this stuff is being moved around, and like where it's going to go and what it's going to go past, and the GPS situation, and there's a high school in one direction, and I'm just thinking about how that's all going to play out. And I think could end up being a very extensive process for many neighborhoods in the community, depending on which way they're moving around.
In terms of all the machinery leaving and coming in?
Well, it sounds like they have to remove rocks and clean up the land and probably move some earth. So I'm just kind of thinking about, we might want to be a little more clear on the hours that that's going to happen, because of how far that could extend through town, depending on who they're working with or who the contractor is?
Yeah. Karen, I can just talk a little bit about the process there. And Steve mentioned it, but there are a couple different types of contractors that are on site, but there's not much overlap, luckily. So as Steve said, the first thing we do is work on the entrance to the site and put in that entrance. And then we have the tree folks on site doing the tree removal and removing the stumps. And once that work is done, then we have the civil contractor come in and build the access road. And a lot of the access road on this project is existing. So it'll be extended in certain areas and sort of beefed up as needed. But that's not typically a lot of workers. It's some bigger equipment. The tree work actually is the largest equipment. That doesn't take all too long. And then the civil work, pushing some dirt around, grading as needed. As Steve said with solar, we try to do the least amount of grading possible because it's really just an expense to us. And these solar sites do not need to be completely flat. So we're just doing grading as needed and covering any debris that might be visible, and that's a worker safety approach. And then after the site is prepped, the racking company comes in and installs the racking. And again, that's not a huge crew. They go site to site all around the Northeast. These crews of we're planning to use TerraSmart racking, and they come in and put the racking in, and then we use licensed electricians which you have to do in Massachusetts, to install the solar panels. And that's the busiest time in terms of the amount of people on site. There's there might be, on the busiest days, there might be 20 electricians on site. But that's only about a month of work out of this 5-month process. But yeah, they're getting the busy, from a traffic perspective, they're getting to work in the morning. So they're all driving into the site with their cars, and then they're leaving at the end of the work day. So that's, from a traffic perspective, that's kind of the busiest time, I would say. So, just to give you a little more detail about the process.
But Karen, I think that Joe also fully expects, your normal conditions that you might impose on working hours, in terms of they wouldn't get started before 7 a.m. They might start arriving, but they wouldn't start work, and close of businesses, usually for contractors doing this type of work, is 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon. On rare occasions, if something goes later than that, but it's usually Monday through Friday. I don't think that they normally work on the weekends unless it was an emergency where they were trying to, beat a project's deadline or something like that. But we would expect to have normal working hour conditions imposed.
Well, I was just thinking, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I was just thinking that most of the traffic would be coming in from Hopkinton on that other end, coming in from 495 and down 85. Would probably be the most convenient for most of the heavy stuff. Would you think that would be true?
Yeah, I don't know, Joe, if you have an opinion on where they would come from.
I think that's how I usually drive into the site. Certainly I come from 495. So I would agree that's where that's the way that people would be coming in. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you think your heavy equipment would be coming that way as well?
Yeah, shortest distance. But I would imagine, we don't have the civil contractors selected yet until after we get permitted. And, but the ones that I'm thinking of, they would be coming from 495, the ones that we've worked with the most.
And Karen, we have multiple projects ongoing right now that we're monitoring. Some are in tree clearing stages, and some are finishing up. We have one large project that's 12 megawatts with battery storage, similar to this one, but maybe twice as big in terms of the area and number of panels. And they finished up all the panel work within 6 months. They're finishing, they're setting the equipment now. The tree clearing companies, when they come in, it's usually, they might have 3 or 4 different pieces of equipment. It's usually a cutter, a grappler, and then some trucks that would come in periodically to haul. But once the equipment is on site, it doesn't leave. It's not like they take it home with them every day. It stays there until their job is done, and then they get off the site and move, and the next contractor comes in and starts his work when the path has been cleared for him to do what has to be done next.
So if I could, I'd just like to remind everybody, so the planning board has 2 permits in front of it, site plan review and a land disturbance and stormwater permit. So I think in terms of the stormwater stuff, you're in excellent shape with the revisions and the sign off from the peer review contractor. And I would just offer that I think, especially to your point, Karen, that I think I'd like to frame the decision the way that you sort of did for 555 hopping. That is, that you understand the big pieces of the phasing, which sort of Joe just outlined, 6 steps, and that you probably would write a condition that has a contingency for a review of the construction program when they knew what it was, number 1, and then 2, a process for a butter notification so that they understood the same thing. And I think that these direct abutters in particular have a vested interest because a lot of them have assented to either work on their parcels for landscape screening. So I think you would sort of frame the 2 permits the same way that you did for 555 hopping, and that is that you see them again when they have the details worked out. The third part of this is that ultimately the zoning board is ruling on the use. So where the planning board is generally the special permit granting authority for these, the zoning board really has sort of the umbrella power over this project. So my recommendation is that you sort of, you frame your site plan review process and you sort of do a double take and send a recommendation, which may be recommending to the zoning board that they implement the same conditions. If they decide to take your conditions like a step further in terms of, because I'm not really comfortable with your authority under site plan review. So to control things like limiting traffic flow from a certain direction, like not using Marshall Street to, stage your construction equipment, for instance. I think that those issues get set aside. You send those to the zoning board as recommendations for what they do. So there's 3 parts of this, right? So you're talking about the technical parts under the stormwater stuff. Then you're talking about the more general things under the site plan review. That is that their approach to design and their things like screening. And then for the use itself, I think you take your typical special conditions, which I think I included in your packets.
Yep.
For solar projects, and I think you translate those to the zoning board as recommendations from the board.
Okay.
And I didn't get too far, and I apologize for that, but I was going to have a draft for you today. But my approach would be, again, similar to what we did for 555 hopping, which is to say, you should notify abutters, and you should come back in when you get the construction schedule ironed out. And then there's you recommend to the zoning board that they do the same things. You do pre-construction review, and you have peer review throughout, so that you're having two site inspectors. Assuming Weston and Sampson might be working for Joe throughout this project doing oversight, you would also have someone representing the town's interests.
So how do we go about getting all that done this evening? Because that doesn't seem like it's possible to me.
Sure. Well, I think you do the same thing you did for 555, which is to say that you issue, so your typical stormwater permit is a very short permit. However, if you take all those conditions that were put on 555, which is to say that you're expressing the town's goals for stormwater and for erosion control and sediment control. So essentially you're taking what's on their SWIP plan as notes, and you're translating those to a certificate of action for stormwater. So I think that permit is, it's the 2 pages within the draft that I sent you that sort of have the hash marks through them.
Yep.
Those are your typical stormwater permit conditions.
Okay.
And then you add to that the special conditions that you put on the 555 hopping, which is to say that, again, back to the detailed construction schedule when it happens. I think on 555 hopping, I need a better name for that project. On Project Echo, you sort of put a couple of conditions in that overlapped on both the site plan review and the stormwater permit, and I think you would do the same thing here. And I forget where the actual abutter notification landed, but I would just mimic that approach.
Okay. So that could be all done in one motion, or that have to be done?
Do you want to see the draft itself, like verbatim, Karen, or are you comfortable with that approach and just make a recommendation to the zoning board at this point and then formalize stuff?
I mean, is it possible to be able to eyeball it before? I mean, we're saying a bunch of things, but it would be great to be able to see it. I'm not saying that changes necessarily a vote, as long as, these two gentlemen are okay with that, but I really feel that it would be good to read everything all in one piece. I don't know many people that sign things that don't read them.
Right.
So I think that that's fair. We're talking about 3 separate things, and I think it's good for all of us to have an eyeball on that rather than having an abstraction in my head. I have an abstraction in my head right now. And it could be that we're on 2.5 hours here, but
I think what you could vote on tonight is sending those special conditions to the zoning board, so that as conditions 1 through 18 as recommendations to the zoning board to include in their use variance.
Okay.
So now those are your typical special permit conditions.
But much like 555, these gentlemen said that, they really wouldn't be working till 5. So why would we leave that out till 5? If they're going to work from 7 a.m. till 4, why don't we put 4?
If you'd like to, sure.
Number 12.
Yep.
And they also said that they were concerned about if they got behind on a deadline because of rain or something like that. So maybe there could be, I don't know, 3 Saturdays where, as long as they let us know, they can work. Or so I'm not saying 3 has to be the number. It's just an example. However, we are sensitive to the fact that you may have to have a catch-up day, and I think we should communicate that we understand that. However, I think that somebody should have to be informed of that. And I think the abutters should have to know about that.
Okay, so do you want to send it to the zoning board that way, that you think they should, and maybe that's the way to do it now, is just put that in your head, Joe, about sort of framing a condition for the zoning board.
That sounds good.
Okay. So do we, well, with those in there, we'll make a motion that, oh, there's more, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just the other thing was for 555, we were pretty specific about the plantings and the agreements between. So where would that fall?
So Joe has offered me some language, and several abutters have offered language. So they are showing the landscape updates on their record plan set. And I think just like Hopping Brook, I think that the planning board's authority is not so overreaching here. However, the zoning board does have the key power in this situation. They can understand that Joe has offered to do off-site improvements. So, and he's offered them here, and is acknowledging it in your review process. So you understand, for instance, what Jason, as an abutter, right, has gone through several iterations and has agreed to plantings or for screening purposes. I think that iteration of that is better left to the zoning board.
Okay.
Only because their permit is more powerful, if you would.
Okay. That sounds good.
Okay. So with that, would somebody like to make a motion to that? Everything that's been said?
Motion to all that?
Karen says, okay.
Karen's notes.
Warren has seconded it. All in favor? And I'm assuming we're the four of us or not?
Yeah, Jason, I'm recusing.
Okay, yep. Okay.
Aye.
Warren, okay.
Aye.
Okay, Josh and Karen, okay, and then I, okay.
I'm sorry, I missed who seconded the motion.
The second was a Warren.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so just to reiterate, that is your send to the zoning board. So your recommendation is essentially what you normally would do under a special permit for this type of land use. In addition, recommending that they allow some sort of negotiation for Saturday work allowances based on the experience of having to play catch up, as long as the parties are informed. And I guess what I would do is then just draft the other permits for you to act on at the next session.
Okay.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Okay.
So motion for that.
Okay. So you've made a motion to that. Do I have a second?
That's a motion for marching orders for me. Excellent. I need more days to keep me focused.
All right. So I guess we're, other than that, I guess we're good.
So we just have a couple of little general business items, but with this, I think it's good.
So I think, thank you all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys for running a good meeting.
Joe and Bob. Yep. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And I see other towns, I've been on them. I tried to participate in one of your meetings, and I finally figured out the controls, but there's a lot of towns that are sort of just skipping normal business and deferring it. So I appreciate that you're taking these items up, literally discussing them and acting on them, and it's commendable. So I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. You guys have a good night. Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess next would be the approval of minutes. Do we want to do that next? I don't know if everybody's looking at them.
I'll do a motion to approve those minutes.
Okay. Do I have a second on the minutes?
Second, Jason.
Okay, Jason has seconded the minutes. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I have to abstain. I was not here.
Okay, Warren's abstaining, okay. All right. Approval, not required subdivisions.
I'm going to put this up on the screen, Chris, please. Hopping Brook. Nap.
We're all yawning.
This approval not required plan was filed today. It takes the little rat tail, if you would, from lot 3A and puts it into lot 4A. So 4A is your big development site, known as 555 Hopping or Project Echo. You see that he's added some interesting details, and this is for, for the potential buyer as well as what Peter had promised you all, which is that he's identified all the encroachments. So you say A through K on the left-hand side of the plan. You've got some structures and some disturbance across the property line. So they weren't joking when they said that people sort of, are dumping and don't know where their property lines are. This level of detail of survey this is an ALTA plan for the exchange of property. So it's very, very detailed. And it doesn't create any new lots. It's just, again, adding that land to the existing lot 4A.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's done a nice job here, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty detailed for what we asked for.
I don't know if any, so are there any questions, concerns?
No.
I don't seem to have any. Karen? Looks.
No, I'm good with this. This is a multi-step process with them, and Peter is following through on the first thing he told you, which is, which CRG told you, which is that they were going to purchase that property so that they would have control over it. So they've taken that strip, which is along all of the backside of 4A, and added it into the lot.
Yeah.
So that they could control.
All right. Would somebody like to make a motion to that?
I'll move. So moved to approve.
Second.
Okay, Warren has made a motion.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I heard. Okay, Josh has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So I do have the plan available for signature. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll grab it and get you to sign before we adjourn.
The three of us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Okay, so that's, I don't know if there's any other approvals not required subdivision?
Nope, that's the only one.
I guess, other than that, I don't think I saw anything else other than,
Budget?
budget, yeah.
I do have two surety issues on site plan projects. One is the Pulte project on Concord Street. Ali has been working through Marchanda Associates to do their annual bond renewal, and he's recommending a bond adjustment to bring their surety to $700,196.66. These are projects that Ali has oversight on, and that Chris Canny is providing, oversight as well as his role in the building department. This is a special permit issued by the planning board, which is why you have control over this bond.
So it's just a question of making a motion on this?
Yeah, I think we've all been sort of driving through this project every once in a while. You see the progress that they're making. They're nowhere close to having a punch list. This just happened to be a bond renewal for them, and it's about halving their current bond amount.
Okay.
They have not adjusted this multiple times. This is really the only time.
Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion to that?
Motion to that.
Okay, Karen has made a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Warren has seconded that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
The other ongoing construction project that Chris is looking for your endorsement of a surety for, and so this would be in order that he could issue a temporary CO. So the provisions of site plan review allow for someone to bond for the remaining work if the building inspector agrees that that those items are not critical to occupancy of the building. So this one is for 465 Hoppingbrook Road, and it probably will be in several parts, but this is specifically for sort of the site issues, mostly landscaping, that are remaining. If you've been out there, you see that most of the topsoil is out there. They really just need to do the plantings. They are looking for a temporary CO about the 15th of May, and they're cranking on getting in there for the temporary work. They probably will be back to the board to discuss the phase 2 part of their project. They have talked with Chris about removal of the trailers. That was programmed in your special permit. So if you recall the special permit, I think it was 3 phases of construction. So phase 1 was to allow them to do temporary occupancy of the trailers, transitioning over to the phase 1 of the big building, and then construction of the doubling of the size of that building. Okay. So they are working on the logistics of staging the construction for phase 2 of the big building. Wow. So they'll probably be back in to do a modification. I think they would like to retrofit the area where the trailers are to stage the construction for that other phase. This is, Chris would like to hold a bond so that he could do this temp CO for this landscaping work. And he is looking at $103,892. You see that in a, I'm sorry, I just sort of photocopied a little correspondence between the PharmaCann folks and I. The person from PDB Group, who is the general contractor, so they're looking for $103,892. It's an awful lot of dirt and landscaping to be holding a bond for, but the landscape architect from Greenman Patterson, who is their project manager for this, has priced it out this way for them. It's a big hold for not a lot of work, not a lot of work. So they're looking at $103,892. And again, Chris would hold that as the part of the temporary occupancy.
Would somebody like to make a motion to that?
Make a motion to approve Bob.
Okay, Josh has made a motion. Do I have a second? Karen Langdon has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay. I think I've heard. Okay. All right. That's now on to the budget.
What I photocopied for you and sent your way right before the meeting, I just updated the fiscal 21 request. So I had a discussion with the town accountant today about how to do this. So essentially, what you see in the spreadsheet is a rollback of the cost of living increases for our admin staff to the current rate, right? So she's at the top step of their position rating and was only due a cost of living increase in July. So this rolls back the rate. It did not a lot to get you towards the 0% overall, which is what the new guideline for budget adjustment is. So what you see was the delta was about $1,900, which you can take out of professional services. That's a line item that's been in flux. Years when we've had big projects, planning type projects versus, developer litigation projects, it's not a lot of money. And so it's an issue of if you do have a project, you would end up going to the FinCom and asking them for additional money. Anyway, it's money that could match a grant. It's money that could pay consultants. It's money that could pay for legal advice. They're looking for 0% at the moment. So that's what I'm offering you. So the bottom line was 96,922. We've prepared the 0 at 95,962.
Okay.
And you saw in my email transmitted to you that, if they're looking for more drastic cuts, I certainly understand and in a position to offer, my time as flexible, similar to what I did when I was out on Family Medical Leave Act. I sort of conditioned myself to that in the past several years about being able to flex my time and, staff the boards as needed. I'm not sure when Town Hall returns to the new normal, but I'm assuming that for fiscal 21, the summer is going to be a little shaky in terms of people being comfortable staffing full-time and interacting with one another or even interacting with the public, so what we don't know. So, I guess my recommendation to you is that, you offer the 0% to the FinCom if they would like to, talk to you about cutting further. I'm certainly flexible, and I'm probably one of the only people that will readily admit that I'm flexible about reducing my own hours. And certainly we have an admin person who's at 20 hours. That's a benefited position, to decrease those hours sort of from a policy perspective. I'm not sure if the FinCom wants to sort of go after certain positions or reconsider the way that we do business in terms of using admin staff. So I think that's a future discussion. I think for tonight, because they're looking for this for next week, I think, you can offer them a 0% increase and, still feel comfortable that you're having staff time for the number of hours that we're used to in terms of level of service. We still have money for pencils and pens if needed. We are on a spending freeze at the moment, so I think probably the remainder of this year's budget probably will go back to the general fund in terms of anything that's not salaried.
Thank you for going through that. Thank you for presenting to us. I think what is a clear path to providing what I don't think anybody can argue, right? Level spending. And also for being so flexible that if they came back and they needed something else, that we know where you stand on that. And I think with the amount of work that you just put into that, your incredible honesty on that, I see no reason why we shouldn't support you, and I would make a motion to support exactly what you just said.
Okay.
I agree with Karen, and if you all run out of pens, we got a big stockpile here.
I can't even bring my own.
Are you seconding that?
I couldn't have put it better than what Karen just said. And so thank you, Karen Sherman.
Yeah, nice job.
Oh, thank you very much for everything. So.
Agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Should we motion to get out of Dodge?
Yeah, really.
Anything else, or? And I don't know.
I personally would like to thank Chris Mayo, who's still sitting in the room.
Yeah. Thank Chris.
He needs
Thank
a big
you.
nap.
Yeah.
Pretty high maintenance.
So.
Yeah, we might get used to this.
Yeah, Warren's in the next. Warren is in one room over here, and then Josh is in another room down the hallway. We're all up here. There's 3 of us in here, so we're plugging away. So it's great.
Semi-remote. We're all in the same building, but in different rooms.
Yes.
We are physical distancing.
Yeah.
Distancing.
Right.
See everybody.
Oh, I think I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I know we're on TV, so we'll. I think at the end, I think there's something that I need to say.
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Yep. Motion to second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right. Terrific. Thank you very much. And
great night.
I don't.
Good night.
Yeah, thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you. And I guess that concludes. I don't know whether I need to say anything for HCAT or.
Nope, that concludes.
That concludes the meeting. Okay. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You.
Everybody have a good night.